če sem test, bojiš na YouTube. Kaj sem mal? Še Facebook, če to bo smisel. Jaz nisem konca.
Pa, jaz te prijatelj.
Aha, je, zbog ti papir. Ok. Dobro. To je zdaj ok. Ne, je.
Še noben tako
Si kliknil prej tole? Pa si kamera na 40 kliknil. Audio. Ja, tam boš klikati.
Sem zdaj res zvok čisto potigo, da boš kaj...
A, to je... Ne.
Boš preveč od vas, da je...
Aha. Zdaj v redu. Še nekaj bo kuhano po mezi, se mi bi s to
Časa bo.
Ja. Zdaj se prav. Čak, oziroma. Zvok to števe, pa ne pa je za kamera.
Musik, isto, samo klade do isto.
Jasne, tako, vse. Ja, ti si ništi. Ja, ne tem, vse bo vsi to, ne zelo smešno. Tim že pa ti to. Reci.
Nimaš ti preveč zvoka zdaj, veš?
Jaz?
Ker na telefonu se pusa ambient, da ste
Ja,
če en govori, da je ful
ga bom zbližil.
Zdaj, či smo ti, mora biti, veš? Da ne bo tako, kako bomo rekli.
V naši sredi še posebej lepo pozdravljam mednarodno priznane goste. Z nami so David Chichnet, modro Timur, Mike Benedus, Paz Levinson, Ferdinand Regner, Ožbeta Trle in Antalik, ki bodo v nadaljevanju z nami delili razmišljanja o tej avtohtoni sorti. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the International Blaufränkisch Conference 2022, named Blaufränk Think Tank. A big welcome to our international guests, which will in the next time sharing their thoughts on the blaufränkisch with us today. Dovolite za začetek nekaj tehničnih informacij napotkov. Konferenco danes prenašamo na Facebook strani in YouTube kanalu Cuisine Sevnica in si jo bo tudi v nadaljevanju, se pravi kasneje mogoče pogledati. Poskrbeli pa smo tudi, da bo možno prevajanje, tako da kdor si še ni zagotovil slušalk, lahko to še vedno naredi in spremlja potem tudi prenos v slovenščini oziroma v angleščini. V Sevnici si že 12. leto zapored z organizacijo strokovnih posvetov, izobraževanj, ocenjevanja in festivala Modre Frankinje prizadevamo spodbujati dvig kakovosti vin te žlahtne sorte, povečati njeno prepoznavnost in s tem pripomoči k pozicioniranju vinorodne dežele Posavje, kjer je Modra Frankinja tudi najbolj zastopana, tako v nacionalnem kot mednarodnem okolju. Zato nam je še posebej v ponos, da lahko danes tak dogodek gostimo prav v Sevnici. V besedi vabim direktorico Cuisine Sevnica, ki je tudi nosilec aktivnosti v projektu Modra Frankinja, gospod Mojco Trnovšek. Lepo pozdravljeni gostje, soustvarjalci današnje strokovne konference o Modri Frankinji, vinarji, pridelovalci, novinarji, partnerji v projektu Modra Frankinja, žametno vino Posavja in vsi ostali. Danes vas v imenu nosilca in koordinatorja projekta Modre Frankinje, kot je že uvodoma napovedala Anne-Marie, nagovarjam, da spomnim vse nas, kako pomembno je za samo Posavje pridelovalce Modre Frankinje in pa partnerje v projektih, ki so vezani na kulinariko in sam razvoj kulinaričnega turizma, zelo pomembna in da tovrstna srečanja se odvijajo pri nas z nekim namenom in poslanstvom. Zelo smo bili veseli pobude Antalika z Univerze v Novi Gorici, s katero tudi sooblikujemo današnji dogodek, da je prepoznal Sevnico kot točko, kjer se lahko tovrstna konferenca odvija. Znanje vloženo v vinogradništvo in pridelavo je dobrodošel kapital, kateri je ves čas prisoten tudi pri načrtovanju aktivnosti znotraj projekta. Na zavod si skupaj s partnerji že 12. leto zapored prizadeva za dvigovanje kakovosti pridelave Modre Frankinje, nadgrajevati pomen te sorte in širiti prepoznavnost Posavje kot vinske dežele. Preko projekta poskušamo navdušiti in nadgraditi aktivnosti z raznimi delavnicami, izobraževanji, ocenjevanjem Modre Frankinje in vsezadnje s festivalom, ki se odvija vsako leto tu v Sevnici. Ob tem pa smo prepoznali, da je Modra Frankinja pomemben element kulinaričnega turizma, avtohtonost sorte pa kot prednost, ki jo nosi s seboj. V Sevnici smo veseli, da nas tudi od zunaj prepoznavajo kot stičišče, središče Modre Frankinje. Temu je vsekakor pripomoglo tudi samo dejstvo, da imamo na našem bistvu v Sevniškem gradu zasajenih 500 trt Modre Frankinje, pripravljeno vinoteko in klet Modre Frankinje, kjer izvajamo razne degustacije, predvsem, kjer v prvo izpostavljamo prav to sorto. Samo delo na področju povezovanja pridelovalcev in potrošnikov ter vse ostale promocijske aktivnosti pa seveda pripomorejo, da se odvijajo dogodki, kot je današnji, kjer prepoznavamo neko priložnost za povezovanje in nadgradnjo svojega znanja. V preteklosti je bila Modra Frankinja namenjena predvsem za rdeče zvrsti, po letu 2000 pa se delež teh sortnih vin Modre Frankinje močno povečuje. Večjega zanimanja so deležni tudi potrošniki, kar nas zelo veseli, ker je to tudi ena izmed vodilnih usmeritev projektov. Torej, še enkrat zahvala Guillaumu za svojo energijo, ki je dajo v samo modro Frankino. Hvala današnjim govorcem, ki ste in boste svojo prisotnost obogatili ta dogodek. Hvala medijem, da nas podpirate in predvsem hvala vinarjem, da ostajate z nami, nam sledite in dopolnjujete ter sodelujete pri razvoju vseh aktivnosti. Nenazadnje čestitke tudi vsem prejemnikom priznanj 12. ocenjevanja modre Frankine. Za konec poudarim, da če uspešnejši in tisti boljši spodbujajo ostale in svetujejo, se dviga tudi kakovost in konkurenčnost. Zato je današnji dogodek še kako pomemben tudi za sam projekt modre Frankine na žametno vino Posavja. Vsem skupaj nam želim prijetno počutje na današnjem dogodku in upam tudi v nadaljevanju še ugodno počutje v Sevnici in širše v regiji Posavje. Hvala.
Mednarodno strokovno konferenco o modri Frankini letos organiziramo v sodelovanju z Univerzo v Novi Gorici. Z nami je rektor univerze, gospod Boštjan Golob, ki ga vabim k besedi.
Drage udeleženke in udeleženci strokovne konference o modri Frankini, dovolite, da vam zaželim dobrodošlico še v imenu soorganizatorice Univerze v Novi Gorici oziroma specifično Univerzitetnega centra za raziskave vina. Na naši univerzi smo prepričani, da Center za raziskave vina, ki je bil ustanovljen pred 14 leti, skupaj z Fakulteto za vinogradništvo in vinarstvo, predstavlja nujno potrebno akademsko podporo in servis slovenski industriji. Slovenija je vinorodna dežela in kot povsod po svetu smo tudi doma s ponosom gledamo na svoj pridelek. Pri tem pa se zavedamo, da sta vinogradništvo in vinarstvo pomemben del, morda pa še pomembnejši potencial gospodarskega in družbenega razvoja naše družbe. Razvojno-raziskovanje aktivnosti Centra za raziskave vina so usmerjene v iskanje partnerstev za proizvajalce vina doma in v tujini, iskanje novih znanj in spoznanj na tem področju in pa seveda širjenju tega znanja v okviru domačih in mednarodnih projektov. Zavedamo se, da je področje vinogradništva in vinarstva izrazito atraktivna panoga oziroma uporabno področje, pri katerem je tesen stik na eni strani z proizvajalci vina in drugimi akterji, v smislu
2020, 765 vineyards were included in organic production. We are really also proud that we have the oldest Vitis vinifera wine in the Maribor in Lent, which is also in the Guinness Book of Records, and also produce every year some liters of wine. And we are also proud that most of Slovenia is hand-picked, and also when people are visiting wine cellars, usually they can meet the winemaker. And also, yeah, very important, Zdravljica, our national anthem, is also about the wine. If I go to how as Slovenian Tourist Board developing gastronomy, actually with the strategy in 2006, we divided Slovenia in 24 gastronomic regions, so that's really telling us that it's really different, and we have a lot of different dishes and drinks. And gastronomy is like one of the main products besides the Slovenia spas, outdoor and meetings, also with culture. And we really try to provide and build strong gastronomy tourism value chain through the ingredients, the local production, and also through chefs and winemakers, plus trying to do it really sustainable. And we also developed like Slovenia unique experiences, which they, for example, you have a material and then you can do the product, but not every wine tasting So Slovenia is a green boutique destination for unique experiences, and also our main markets are Austria, UK, Germany and Netherlands, and also after the COVID, most of our promotional activities are focused around 500 kilometers in the circle so that people can come with a car, and also, of course, we are doing promotion in other markets. So in 2018, we did the action plan for gastronomy as well. So I said that strategy is with 2006, and then in 2018, we did the new action plan because we were candidating for the title of European Region of Gastronomy, which we had last year. And also, in this plan, we try to implement all the strategic areas and initiatives. So most of them we already completed, no? So we had some this regulatory framework, the trademarks and promotion, of course, also education and marketing towards in Slovenia and in abroad. Of course, without people, without top chefs, without top wine producers and local producers, and because of really diverse nature and sustainability, we are really trying to do the best to promote Slovenia in these directions. And we also, in last year, we have this national anthem for Slovenia Green Scheme, and last year we implemented Slovenia Green Cuisine, which for now we already have 42 providers in this scheme that gain this sign. And today, actually at the same day, close here from Krško, we are having a green day for all the visitors that are new, and we have another event there. And really these products are top restaurants plus top wine sellers. No? This is what I think Slovenia is really boutique in this way, and we have really a lot of potential also to do it more. No? So, like I said, because of the gastronomy region of Slovenia, we had a promotional team for 2 years. So gastronomy, of course, we will continue this promotion, but now for 22 and 23rd, it's the outdoor tourism, it's the topic, but we are also focusing on the wine. So we have two pages. One is Slovenia Info, where you can book all the experiences and check everything about the wine, and also the new portal that we launched in 2020, it's the Taste Slovenia. Also in 2020, we brought Michelin guide to Slovenia the first time. Now it's going to be the 3rd year already. And also with all these videos and articles, I think we did a lot of promotion and put Slovenia in the gastronomy map. Also with Gomio, it's already now from the 2019, so every year. And then, of course, we present gastronomy in all our workshops and fairs abroad. We always have the culinary people that present food at the stand. Also in our social media, in digital campaigns, in some advertising offline, and a lot of top media already describe Slovenia as a wanted destination also regarding wines and others. So I hope you will also bring good thoughts about Slovenia wine after this conference. And of course, you're invited to come again and to visit more wine regions and winemakers. We also send these newsletters every month. We have two these representatives, one in Milan, one in Munich, and one in Vienna. So we do a lot of promotion abroad. And with our publications and now new catalog, we are preparing new catalog also that will include wine. So that's shortly, but welcome to visit our websites or to ask me anything. I'm here with you all day. Thank you.
V prvem delu konference bodo, kot rečeno, razmišljanja o modri frankinji z nami delili naši današnji gostje. Sledila bo okrogla miza na temo modre frankinje, srečanje pa bomo zaključili z razglasitvijo rezultatov 12. ocenjevanja modrih frankinj. Kot je razvidno iz programa, ki ste ga prejeli ob prihodu, bosta med posameznimi sklopi tudi dva krajša premora. Čas je, da besedo predam moderatorju strokovnega dela konference. Vodil jo bo Robert Gorjak, velik poznavalec in ljubitelj vin, tudi modre frankinje, in že 5. leto tudi naš zunanji sodelavec pri ocenjevanju te žlahtne sorte. Robert, beseda je tvoja.
Dobar dan, dobrodošli, se tukaj sliši, se čuje. Dobar dan, welcome. When Guillaume told me about the conference and about who is coming, I was really thrilled to see the list of guests that is coming. So I'm really happy that this is happening here in Sevnica, in Slovenia, which is not the biggest wine country in the world, as you could see from the previous presentation, but with a big heart. So really a warm welcome also from my side to be here and to support this important event. Blaufränkisch, as you know, it's not Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's not Merlot, it's not everybody's darling, yeah, but the idea of this conference is actually to give a bit light on this great grape variety that can do marvelous things, which is already shown by producers in Austria, Hungary, Slovenia, Germany, and other countries. And 7 speakers that are coming will try to emphasize what is important, what the difficulties about like presenting and selling, for example, Blaufränkisch. I think you need disciples, not just the Jesus, to tell people this is something you should go forward. But the times are good, I think, for Blaufränkisch, because people are searching for new stuff. People are searching for new things. They are searching for grape varieties that have, I would say, vibrancy, that have characteristics like, for example, Cabernet Franc or Blaufränkisch is in the same league. So these, I think, are good times. Communication is better than ever. So I think this will be another kickoff for the Blaufränkisch. And that this is really important conference. I think one of the signs is that Simon Wolf is wearing a blue shirt, so not the amber one, so really. And yeah, with this introduction, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, which is Ožbej Peterle. Your talk will be about Blaufränkisch, the new beginning. Ožbej, welcome to the stage. So, what is the new beginning? So I'll leave you the stage. I'll take off, and off you go.
Cool. Robert, thank you very much. It's great to be here. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Chichnet, for the invitation. Also, thank you, Guillaume, and to the whole crew. We have already started yesterday at Repouche, and we had a great dinner with amazing wines as well. And hopefully today we will continue. Just 1 second. So, yeah, Modro Frankenja, the new beginning is the title of my presentation. In order to define the new beginning, one should define where is the starting point of the development. So, since Moran already explained something about Slovenia as a wine country, and with all the foreign guests coming here, actually I will also delve into the Slovenia as a wine country, and then of course we'll focus on Modro Frankenja as a grape variety, and then of course also finish with what had happened in the last 10 years and what also can be achieved. So this is going to be a brief presentation. It's working. Yeah. Robert, you probably know this slide. So Slovenia is a wine country. As you know, that we have, it's divided in 3 different regions. So in the western part, we have so-called, it's a Primorska wine region, which literally means at the sea. We have 4 districts in the Primorska. So we have Goriška Brda, Vipava Valley, Karst, and Slovenska Istra. But then for Modro Frankenja, most important, of course, is the eastern part of Slovenia. So we have Podravje and we have Posavje wine regions. Both are named after the rivers which are flowing into in the region. So, and then the Podravje region is divided by Prekmurje and Štajerska, and of course Posavje, where we are now, is divided by Bizeljsko-Sremič, Dolenjska, and Bela Krajina. So, as it was said before, we have roughly around 15,000 hectares. This data is a bit old now. So we are below 15,000 hectares in Slovenia, at least what is officially registered. We have 51, I think it's already 53 grape varieties which are allowed, and as it was said before, 70% is white wine, 30% is red wine. You can see the chart of grape varieties which are produced in Slovenia. What is funny or interesting for me, that's among top 5 grape varieties, there are 3 grape varieties which you cannot usually find bottled as a single varietal. So you cannot find Jama Czernina, it's super difficult to find Laški Riesling, and like actually, you see Modra Frankinja, it has the new beginning, so it's a bit different with Modra Frankinja. What it's also super important about Slovenia is the other thing. So we have 15,000 hectares, but we have 30,000 grape growers and winemakers. So if you divide 15,000 versus 30, it's 0.5 hectares of vineyard per wine grower. And the majority of those wine growers, they also produce wine, but only 2,500 actually bottle wine as well. Why I'm saying this, this means that in Slovenia, wine is super incorporated in our culture, way of living. We drink around 40 liters of wine per year. So it's really a thing which is, well, part of our culture. And Modra Frankinja as well. Yeah, in terms of the regions, as I said before, we have around roughly 6,300 from Podravje. Then we have a bit bigger, it's Primorska with 6,400, and Posavje is the smallest with 2,500 hectares, where we are now. Exactly. So all in all, we produce between 80 and 90 million liters per year. So this is the, well, last season was super sad, I mean, super bad. We only produced, I mean, it was like 30% less, 20% less of that. But usually it's roughly, this is the number of liters we produce in Slovenia. Okay, just since we are in Posavje, and this is the most important region for Modra Frankinja in Slovenia, so it's divided by Dolenjska, Bizeljsko Stremič, and Bela Krajina. As you can see, Bela Krajina is the smallest district in Slovenia with 340 hectares. Bizeljsko Stremič, roughly 800, and then Dolenjska with 1,500 hectares. So these are the main producers of blaufränkisch in Slovenia, as we will see later. Okay, and then finally move to Modra Frankinja in Europe. So this grape variety, among grape varieties in the world, it's roughly around 25th place in terms of the hectares planted in the world. So all in all, it's around 50th place in terms of white and red grape varieties. As you can see here, so in Europe, we have around 18,000 hectares. And as you can see, Hungary is by far the biggest. So we have around 8,000 hectares in Hungary. Following, actually, afterwards is Austria with 3,200, and then we have Germany, 1,900, and Slovakia, a bit less. And Slovenia, as you can see here, it's actually among the smallest ones. So we have now 632 hectares. It was registered last year. But you can also find Frankinja in Romania, in Italy as well, in Bulgaria, but also outside Europe, as you probably know. It grows in Australia, it grows in UK, US, it grows in Peru, so it's actually, but Europe is the main core of this grape variety. And this is data for Slovenia, all in all, so how much of the blaufränkisch we have in Slovenia in terms of the hectares per vineyard. So I got data from 2004 to 2020. So we have this kind of growth in the beginning, and then more or less stagnated at 700 hectares of vineyards. And then there's a slow decline, but I think this will actually probably get back to the normal 700. Why I think it's also important, when I mentioned before 30,000 grape producers. As you have seen, the area of vineyards in Slovenia is slowly declining. So all the small producers, which are mostly based in Štajerska and Posavje region, so which means that those who have actually the majority of Frankinja, they are pretty old. The average age of Slovenian wine grower is 65 years. So it's kind of a quite difficult field. So when this looks like that actually is stagnating, you have to consider that the overall area is declining. So which means that Frankinja is doing Slovenia in that regard quite all right. Of course, and now we have a divided vineyard area by the district, as you can see. So Dolenjska is the most important, obviously, with more than 250 hectares of Frankinja, followed by Bizeljsko, which is the same as Štajerska. There was no Frankinja in Prekmurje back in 2000, but now they have 16 hectares, so there's a change. And Bela Krajina, it's kind of stagnating, but the problem with Bela Krajina is like from year to year, they're actually losing vineyard area because people are, the average size of a vineyard in Bela Krajina is 0.23 of a hectare. So it's super small, it's super difficult to maintain, especially if you look at the economic terms of that as well. All right, modern Frank in terms of liters. So as you can see, we have lousy 2010 and 2014 vintage, and 21 was, I mean, quite bad as well. But overall, you can see the growth in production. And one more thing about Frankinia, actually, the thing is that like 20 years ago, you couldn't find, I mean, it was super difficult to find more than one single Frankinia in the store. Nowadays, we have between 10 and 15 different single varietals in the store, which means that blaufränkisch, modern Frankinia is a grape variety which is used in blends in Slovenia. So we have the regional blends like Cviček, like Bizeljčan, Belokranjčan, or Metliška Črnina, I mean, in Bela Krajina. So the majority of grape variety is actually produced in blends, and it's not actually as a single variety. So you can see the same thing in terms of the liters by district. But then, of course, not to spend too much time on the data, this is the core of the presentation, the new beginning. So what is good about this grape variety, as Robert said before already? I mean, it's something new, but first of all, let's start from the beginning. This is a grape variety which has potential for producing high quality wine. I think this is super important, so we have quite quality grape variety. What is also good about Posavje and Slovenia as such, we have great terroir for this grape variety in order to flourish, to have like really good examples of that. Then the other thing is, yesterday we tried 12 to 15 different Frankinias. You could see that each bottle has each unique story to tell, which means that it's a grape variety where the terroir, it's actually expressed in a different way, which I think is also super nice in this regard. Then the fourth thing, which I think it should be expressed more and more. So when I did my diploma thesis for the Wine Academy in Austria, so I had a simple questionnaire. So I asked Slovenian wine connoisseurs and experts like only 3 simple questions. So the first question was, what is good about Slovenian wine sector? The second one, what is bad? And the third one, what we have to do in order to make things better. And so the answer for the second question, what is bad, was like there is no cooperation within the sector among wine producers. Everyone hates everyone, so it's a super disaster kind of sector. But what I like here in this modern Frankinia project, which is lasting now for 12 years, there's a cooperation between Sevnica. There's a cooperation between wine producers, between restaurants, between Slovenian Tourist Board as well. So I think universities, sommeliers, so I think this is a super good example of how one group of people with a common idea and vision can work together and get things moving, which I think is super, super good. On the other hand, so Robert Gorek, he was the president of the commission, the judging table 2 weeks ago. So we can see that Frankinia can succeed in different shapes and forms. So it can be a sparkling wine, it can be a nice rosé wine, it can be light red, full-bodied red. I mean, it has a lot of different things to offer, which I think is good as well. One more thing about Posavje, like the quality increase in the last 20 years is just enormous, you know, which I think is another good thing that actually people are investing time, knowledge, and energy to this project. So as was said before, so blaufränkisch, you know, ABC, anything but Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon, so there's something new to offer. It's a trendy kind of grape variety, which I think is also cool. So room for improvement. To conclude slowly, there's always place how to be better. And first of all, yes, as we were talking with different wine producers, Frankinia was sometimes planted maybe not on the best sites. So I mean plots. So I think that more research can be done in terms of clone selection as well as in terms of where Frankinia should be planted in the vineyard. So there's definitely room for improvement in that regard. Viticulture, of course, the classic system in terms of what could be better. Also, sometimes I was talking to Klemen Lisek, he's in charge of the KIS, so Slovenian Agricultural Institute, and he said that there's a lot of really good wine produced in the beginning, but because of the, I don't know, bad oak or like, well, I mean, not the best winemaking techniques, then the Frankinia doesn't come out as it should. So it's also in terms of what winemakers are doing in the cellar, it's another, like also in terms of investments in new technologies, is actually another thing to improve. In search of the style, I think it's difficult to say that we already have a style, a specific style of Slovenian blaufränkisch, or let's say Posavje and blaufränkisch. I think it's too early to tell, but I think in the long run, maybe it's not a bad idea to have kind of recognizable style, which is also recognized outside Slovenia. So, and the last thing, yeah, it's a bit provocative, obviously, if you guys since you're from Posavje, but why not also having modra frankinja in Primorska region? Is it a blasphemy, or actually you think it could add to the story of modra frankinja in Slovenia as well as outside Slovenia? So Primož Lavrenčič has planted 0.4 of, so like 40 Rs, less than half of the hectare. But I think it's worth considering if we spread Frankinja also to the western part of Slovenia in order to boost the whole story of Frankinja, because it's the great variety, and as well as I think the producers deserve that, and that this should be a next, excuse me, a next successful story of Slovenia. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, before we move to the next speaker, is there any question for Ožbe, maybe? At the moment, we'll have discussion at the beginning, at the end. But if there is a question now, we can. Yes, please. Well, can we get another mic, please? So I'll move this one to the. Yes, can you repeat that, please?
Are there already some experience growing blaufränkisch in the Primorska?
So what Primož does, actually, he uses the blaufränkisch for a blend with refoško and with pokalca, with scorpetino. So it's, he doesn't do it as a single varietal, but I think back in the days, Frankinja was also actually present in that part of the world, if I'm not mistaken. Robert, you did the
history book says it was good. It could be bottled. It was that good. Yeah. So that was what history said. Yeah. In fact, blaufränkisch was in Slovenia kind of in the shadow until 2016, when it was recognized as Slovenian, which will be challenged later that day here in Slovenia. But yes, so. But I think one of the valid question is about the style. What is the proper style? Which I think David will tell us more about. Unless there is another question. Yes, Guillaume. If you get it on, then...
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's not a question, just a comment on the blaufränkisch in Primorska. And to respond to Ferdinand. Yes, and for me it's a complete nonsense that this variety is not allowed to be planted in that part, especially when you see that you have Pinot Noir, Merlot, so you have between Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon, and then you cannot officially plant blaufränkisch, which for me, especially if you go to Vipava Valley and the upper valley, which is slightly cooler, very stony, very draining, lot of flesh. I think it's a beautiful terroir for blaufränkisch. You mentioned Primož, but there is other producers that started to plant for the last few years some blaufränkisch. So it's, I really hope that the thing will be pushed forward. Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think we had the refreshment of grape varieties just beginning of this year. Is that correct in Slovenia? And it didn't happen. So to include blaufränkisch. Okay, good. Let's move to another speaker. David Chichnet, please welcome to the stage. If you don't know David is actually a legend. He covered Burgundy and Germany for Robert Parker because Robert didn't have a clue about how to judge Burgundy. So David took it over, and that's it. David, please welcome.
I was getting some booming from those mics. Can everybody hear me fine?
Yeah.
Just have to leave my cheat sheet here for a couple of quotes. Yeah, so I wanted to address the issue of style, but I'm going to start with a bit of history. Some of you may be bored, but I find the references to historical references to blaufränkisch seem to be... Oh,
yeah, it's...
Yeah. Okay. Is that a good level?
Solid.
It's good?
Yeah, a bit more maybe, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Good.
So I find the references, the historical references, are sometimes very incomplete and muddled, and I like to believe that history is very important, and for nothing else, in the case of wine, as a clue to possible. Yeah, that's why I asked you. All right, are we now ready?
Absolutely.
You have to tell me. Okay. All right. So, you know, history is interesting, perhaps partly as a clue to style. In fact, an opportunity to give another plug for Simon's book about skin macerated wines. If you want to see how history is relevant to style, why, if you haven't read Amber Revolution, you'll get a great lesson in that connection. So the history of blaufränkisch is very hard to pull out, and the principal reason for that you can find right at the beginning of the very short commentary that was written about an imperial wine exposition in 1862, and which is usually cited as the first reference to blaufränkisch as a grape. I think I can remember this one by heart. The entry begins, blaufränkisch, frequently misrepresented in this exposition as red Burgundy, and known as Lemberger in Germany. That's how it begins. Well, a couple of things we can see already. Although this seems to be the earliest reference to blaufränkisch by name that we can find, or at least that Google Books can dig up, it's pretty obvious just from the introduction that it's not a grape variety that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. In fact, the author pointing out that the wine was being presented at the exposition, just identified as Burgundy. And in fact, if you go back to the earliest references, for instance, in former German West Hungary, the Esterhazes had some plantings already at the end of the 18th century that went under the name Red Burgundy, some grapes that apparently they put great stock in, and that could be, that was in Horizon, by the way, that could be the origination of blaufränkisch planting in German West Hungary. We just don't know. If we look at the situation in Württemberg, where it's the only significant plantings of Lemberger or Limberger, as it was then known, you'd only see references really beginning in the second or third decade of the 19th century. I met Daniel Deckers very briefly at the Vinery, and he told me that he was thrilled to have come up with two early lists from the 1820s from Germany of pepinierists who were selling Lemberger vines. But you know, I'm going to concentrate mostly on Austria, which I know best, but it is kind of interesting to note that up until the end of the 1980s, the total acreage of blaufränkisch in Germany was considerably less than the acreage of blaufränkisch in Slovenia today. It then exploded, and now there are 4.5 times as much acreage, but it always took second place to other grape varieties and was usually blended out and really emerged only as a significant solo cepage in the 1990s. So in a way, the evolution in Germany is not so different from what I'm going to tell you about a bit in Austria. Anyway, back to that earliest references. 1862 is really very misleading because Shams, the Hungarian whose books on the then empire are considered the first really comprehensive accounts of viticulture in what is today Hungary, Slovenia, Austria, etc. He already mentions Schwarzfränkisch in his book in 1835. What's really amazing to me still about the history there is that this is not a reference in his 1832 tome about grape growing in Hungary. This is in his 1835 book about grape growing in Austria, because the first mention of the grape as Schwarzfränkisch is in the Baden sector of what's today the Termenregion, so in then Austria, and it is as an appearance. I love he says as a leuchtet. It's beginning to emerge into view in this area as a grape to blend with the traditional Pinot Noir, or Burgunder, if you will, and Portugieser. So we can see that the earliest distinctive reference to the significance of and importance of blaufränkisch is as a blending grape. It added something to the mix, and because the Pinot Noir was already really well established, possibly since medieval times in that area south of Vienna, why they made a sharp distinction between what was a Burgundy from Burgundian origins and this interloper blaufränkisch. Later commentators often refer to the two Burgundies, Portugieser and the two Burgundies. Why nobody in today's Termenregion would not be at least interested in creating such a blend, I don't know, but it hasn't happened since. Almost all the references then that we see in the latter part of the 19th century are still references to the use of blaufränkisch for blending in the wines in the Baden area. Now, so the 1862. Pull it up for the original. The 1862 reference. Oh, it always gets cited, but nobody ever reads the entire reference. So, to go back to the beginning again, wrongly known under the name of Burgundy, widely shown and wrongly presented as Burgundy in this exposition, known as Lemberger on the Rhine. It's a grape variety which, on account of its late ripening, high acid, low coloring, modest productivity, on account of that, it's only capable of making the least sort of red wine. Like geringeren Rotwein, a much lesser red wine than those of the preceding varieties. And guess what the preceding varieties on his list were? Of course, Portugieser and Pinot Noir. And can, on that account, absolutely not be recommended for planting. So the reference was, please stay away from this grape. Now, if we want to fast forward to what we know a little bit more about, the evolution of blaufränkisch style in Austria, at least, in present-day Austria in the 20th century, you can see that the 1862 description kind of nailed the issues that were involved there. And the consumption of the style and consumption of blaufränkisch, as far as we can tell, for most of the 20th century, was a fairly early drinking, light, fresh wine. It seems to have had something of the negative reputation that all those horrible wines of the Wachau had during the 19th century, too sour, too high acidity. And so one way to look at what has happened in the evolution now in the later 20th century evolution of blaufränkisch, one way to look at it is people trying to run away from the grape or trying to figure out how to compensate for its limitations. And possibly we can also see people trying to embrace the characteristics that in an earlier period in history seemed like detriments or disadvantages to the grape. It's a little bit difficult when you talk to the old timers. It's a little bit difficult to get eyewitness accounts of what blaufränkisch during, let's say, the 60s and 70s in present-day Burgenland tasted like. But what we do know for sure is that the acidity was suddenly emerged as a potentially positive factor because, as the old-timers will tell you, when Austria was trying to revive their viticulture in the 70s, 60s, 70s, they were very much looking toward Germany for advice. It was German tourists who were starting to come in numbers and bring some money into the country to buy wine, and the emphasis was on producing fresh, bright, high-acid whites. As a result, the interpretation of blaufränkisch was that if you left your blaufränkisch in barrel for more than 3 or 4 months, for one thing, it would probably, horror of horrors, undergo malolactic fermentation, and secondly, you wouldn't be able to get it on the market fast enough to sell it as a fresh, lively wine. And so there was definitely a tendency toward superficiality in blaufränkisch, and the turning point, really, by all accounts, came with Ernst Triebaumer when he got serious about the idea of giving this wine a bit of time in barrel, letting it go through malo. He said, you know, that was never considered an issue until the Germans got involved in advising us, right? And then he made this wine from his Marienthal vineyard in 1986 that sort of by accident got placed in a prominent tasting, blind tasting with a lot of well-known red wines and well-respected red wines at the time, and it blew everybody away. And you know, subsequent tastings confirmed that this was a wine of extraordinary quality. And in fact, it was. I'm delighted to say one reason I'm inspired by blaufränkisch is it was only the second blaufränkisch that I ever tasted, because I was tasting it with Triebaumer, and then after tasting me on an earlier blaufränkisch, then he popped this wine on me. At the time, it was already 9 years in the bottle when I first tasted it. And in any case, that was really an epiphanal moment in the stylistic history of blaufränkisch. But the role of genetics was really decisive already at that stage, and too little recognized, because what's growing there in the Marienthal is a quite distinctive population of blaufränkisch with relatively small berries, loose clusters, and after 1986 is 1992. It took till 1992 before some of his colleagues got serious about trying to showcase blaufränkisch as a wine. So that's the year when you have Umriss from Pfeiler Artinger, you have an Ungerberg blaufränkisch from John Nitnaus, and the next year you have from the Priors the Goldberg blaufränkisch. So all of a sudden, the idea that you could have a serious blaufränkisch and that it could be showcase a vineyard got going. Now, a couple of anecdotes about that era that I think are quite illuminating. First off, at the time, probably after Triebaumer, Colvens probably had the highest reputation in Austria for red wine, and this was largely with wines from Cabernet and Merlot. He was a pioneer in planting the Bordeaux varieties, and you know, I remember asking him, say, well, why were you later to the party on blaufränkisch? Because he certainly had fantastic history, and you know, he gave a very honest appraisal. He said, you know, I realized that the only way to get people's attention of red wine in Austria was to do something that would have a connection with the international market, and that if you could demonstrate with Cabernet and Merlot that you could produce something really outstanding, people would pay a lot more attention to you. It's amusing, though, to me that still, I mean, this is perhaps prejudicial, but I mean, if I have to drink Cabernet and Merlot from Austria, I would still definitely go to Triebaumer or to Colvens. I haven't really tasted very many exciting developments with Merlot or Cabernet since. It's sort of a bit of a dead end. And the John Nitnaus is 92. Ungerberg, which I tasted in 1999, and it was fantastic wine, but it was actually, he viewed it as an experiment. And he actually made 2 single cepage, single vineyard reds that year. The other one was a pure Merlot. In the end, in the years immediately following, he followed up on the Merlot. He didn't follow up on the blaufränkisch. It was a number of years before he got back to producing a blaufränkisch. Again, you can see the tendency now to try to say, well, we better view blaufränkisch under the aspect of Bordeaux, under that sort of international aspect. And the Goldberg from Prieler, despite the success that Trubaumer's wine had and the press they'd gotten, Prieler couldn't sell the wine after they got it in the bottle. And in 1996, so by that time the wine had been almost 2 years in bottle, they had sold 24 bottles in total to their Austrian countrymen. And they just lucked out because a Swiss agent came by, tasted the wine, and said, oh my God, how much of this do you have? And it was gone. And eventually, of course, this has often been the case, eventually the Austrians learned what they had given up, and they were able to reclaim their share of the wine. Anyway, you can see that things were very tentative. The start at first was slow, and now to take that back to the issue of style and the tension between expressing blaufränkisch's uniqueness and compensating for its perceived weaknesses. After this early flourishing in the early 1990s, Austria got increasingly serious about their red wine. Of course, it helped that they began to get international headlines for their Rieslings and Gruner Veltliner from the Wachau. They had people like Uli Kracher as ambassadors internationally. So red wine got pulled along. And in that period, you had a really strong tendency to try to say, okay, the grape is really high acid, so what can we do to compensate for that? Well, we have to leave it on the vine longer. Perhaps there's a few tricks in the cellar that we need to engage in. Also, that the wine is very modest in tannin, and now if you're starting to perceive it up against Merlot, Cabernet, Syrah, you start to get worried about that. But no problem, because wood has lots of tannin too, and Così fan tutti, everybody's into barrique, so you put it in barrique. It's a little sweet sour. Well, you sweeten it a little more with a little more oak. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but essentially a strong trend developed for producing blaufränkisch that could stand international comparison, and was perhaps as a result less distinctively blaufränkisch. So when I got involved by the late 90s, I was tasting pretty regularly in Burgenland, and this was on the eve of what I'm going to suggest is the next stylistic landmark for blaufränkisch. And I remember tasting a lot of these wines and thinking, I had a lot of experience in Bordeaux, and I thought, well, if they think these are ever going to make it in a direct comparison there, I think that they're barking up the wrong tree. People have tried to explain to me why they took the approach that they did. And then I had a funny experience, because there was a little publishing house in Germany that reprinted the Goethe and Goethe Atlas from the 1870s. That was the go-to atlas of valuable grape varieties, of the most valuable grape varieties in the then monarchy. And so I had gotten a copy of this, and of course this is the short version. They were all hand-colored, beautiful engravings that were hand-colored to reproduce the different grapes. So I flip it open to the page for blaufränkisch. Can't wait to read what the background from Goethe is essentially very, very thin, because he admitted too that we don't really know. He didn't know where this grape came from. That's coming, of course, but nobody knew at the time. Lemberger, okay, we know now, referring to Slovenia, but I don't think that was clear at the time. The grape was associated in general with German West Hungary and with parts of the Hungarian Crown, but it wasn't really wasn't really fixed in terms of its source. But anyway, so Goethe's description and what he had to say about blaufränkisch was not terribly interested. And what was revelatory to me was to look at the plate, and it's like these small conical cone-like clusters of little berries, and you know, beautiful. So I thought, well, I got to pack Goethe in my luggage because I'm going to really give these some of these growers a hard time. So I go back to some of the people who had tried to explain to me how, you know, it's a thin-skinned, big grape variety, and you have to look at a way to compensate for that. And so I said, well, look, somehow I brought the subject around to people who are doing Pinot Noir too, of course, to clonal selections of Pinot Noir and the virtues of Selection Massal. And so I said, look at this beautiful picture from 1877, I think it was. I forget which date's the atlas here. Look at this gorgeous picture. So, oh yeah, these are. What a beautiful epitome of Pinot Noir. Then I flip it over to the other side to the facing page, and they see this is blaufränkisch, circa 1870. And so you can see right away from the morphology of the grape and the nature of the berries, it was a very different animal. And what then happened, beginning at the end of the 90s, in terms of the next major advance stylistically for blaufränkisch, was really absolutely dependent in part, to a significant degree, on finding a better material, which meant going to old vines, which unfortunately continue to diminish in number despite all of the notoriety that blaufränkisch has justifiably gotten in the last 40 years. But in any case, going to old vines, starting to make vine selections, and that has been really a key to the quality of what came. Okay, so then the next seminal year is really 1999. And then you have a young guy named Uwe Schiefer in Südburgenland and Kritzler in Südburgenland. You have them beginning to get serious about blaufränkisch, and in particular Schiefer with much more of an inspiration from Burgundy. It's so a very different approach to vinification. Most of you are versed enough in the differences that I don't have to explain a lot. But gradually open top fermentation, some use of whole clusters, different sort of barrel regimen, and a very conspicuously different character. Then one of the two Fehlich brothers, or Roland, decided to to stake his reputation on blaufränkisch, and began the Moritz project in 2001. And there he was trying to take lessons both from Burgundy and also from the Rhone. From the Rhone, especially inspiration of Chave to create complexity by doing microvinifications of individual parcels, but then putting them together and having a flagship wine, village-designated flagship wine, of which he then notoriously had two, the Neckenmark and the Lutzmannsburg. So at that point, we begin to see a tendency toward less extraction, much less prominence of oak, and also toward embracing the potential positive aspects of the higher acidity in the grape, and picking for grapes that still have a certain crunch to them. Then Dorlia Muir comes along, 2006, and at the time she told me, she said, well, I mean, she was now taking this in a way to an extreme, at least in description, and said, I think I really want to make a beautiful red-white wine. So to try to realize that blaufränkisch, in a sense, there are certain white wine virtues that this grape has, and to try to bring those out. Now, I think that it's important to put this a bit of evolution that I just sketched into perspective in a couple of ways. First off, if you look especially about what's happened now in the last 20, 25 years, there are more and more people working with this grape who are seriously concerned about it and understand the significance of vine genetics and the importance of trying to capture old vine genetics and practice selection massal. Certainly there's tremendously more sensitivity to the way in which the fruit gets extracted, the playing with whole clusters and playing with shorter vatting times and general pressing, etc. Definitely there's a tendency toward bigger barrels, older barrels, more sophistication of barrels, and much less knee-jerk use of whatever the Bordelais and Burgundians are having. And then in terms of extending the élevage, certainly there's a lot more play involved now in terms of how long the wines are given in barrel, and so all of this is tremendously important, but the perspective is that none of these are trends that are peculiar to blaufränkisch. These are all trends that are taking place internationally with red wine. The second correction to, or bit of perspective to bear in mind, I think, is that in Austria, there is still the style of wine that was developed in the 1990s, a more powerful wine with attempt to give much more extraction from the blaufränkisch, with later harvest, with prominence of new wood. The people who are most successful with that style are still fantastically successful, and not just in Austria, in Germany as well. In Germany, of course, the overwhelmingly largest market for Austrian wine. So I like to think of the stylistic perspective here as part of a general trend. I kind of pompously once called this the end of wine history. By that I mean we are increasingly style conscious, and God knows fashion continues to be an important factor in wine. But if you look at the incredible diversity of blaufränkisch that's out there, and especially look at what we've got in store for you tomorrow morning in the tasting, I mean, what we see now is a tremendous stylistic diversity, and probably going forward indefinitely. There's no longer the sense that there has to be you know, Hegelian or Marxian interpretation of, you know, where are we headed, a teleological notion of the destiny of blaufränkisch. And when I got, especially when I got involved writing full-time for Bob Parker for a while, you know, people were always coming up to me and I mean, sometimes asking impossible questions, and I would all the time get the question, so what should be the style, or what do you see as the style of blaufränkisch? I mean, this immediately conjures up to me the idea that there's style police up there, or that there's a court of stylistic judgment. And I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say this about Austria, but you know, it's not just Austria, but in the case of blaufränkisch, Austria is at fault. That often there is, at the highest echelons, of the people who want to promote the wine, the people who write the wine laws, there is this kind of notion. We have to fix what the style is. We have to decide what is the typical, what is the correct expression of blaufränkisch. I mean, this is totally deadly. Fortunately, I think now we've passed a point where for the people who are serious about this grape, that will never be an issue. People will find their way to produce something distinctively delicious from this grape, and although we have less of the inspiration from history in the case of blaufränkisch, because we just don't know, as I said, what was being done even 60, 70 years ago with this grape. But if you look at what's happened in the evolution of other grapes, I think, for instance, of Riesling in the Mosel, or Grüner Veltliner in Lower Austria, I mean, you see that they're part of a trend for people to look back and try to think, well, what would it be like if we turn back the clock? Well, if we try to produce wine the way it would have and could have been produced 60 or 70 years ago, or maybe even earlier. Again, this is all wonderful, and this is not for somebody to define how blaufränkisch should take a U-turn and go back, or a grape variety should take a U-turn and go back to the way it was before. It's simply exploring the many different possibilities that are out there. And so I like to think that going forward, we're going to keep this multiplicity. And certainly with respect to the potential interference from the wine police or the wine authorities, if you look at what's happening worldwide, I mean, the people who go their own way, the worst thing that happens, then it's terrible. But I mean, the worst thing is that they have to sell all their wine under fantasy names because the law doesn't allow them to tell you where it came from or what it's made from. But people are demonstrating every day that it works. It works. You can sell them. So I think we're going to have a great future of diverse blaufränkisch styles. I should have kept track of time. I don't want to run out over here. Well, if I can give you just maybe 3-4 more minutes. Although I think it's deadly to think about trying to narrow down a particular style is correct, I also all the time get asked about where people try to interpret and we've all had this happen, interpret our own preferences in terms of wine. So I just want to put the notion of stylistic preference in a little bit of context. Obviously, it's fashionable today everywhere in the world to talk about trying to get a wine that is distinctively reflective of place, that somehow reflects the microclimate and the soils, or at least the region in which it's produced. I think that's well and good, but I think wine growers, it's easy for them to get carried away and perhaps not be realistic about how little we know about just what it is in the soil, in the microclimate, that has influences on the way in which the grape taste. And it's very easy to convince yourself, I'm sure as a producer, certainly I know as a critic, it's easy to convince yourself that you're tasting terroir, quote unquote, when perhaps you really don't know what exactly it is behind the flavors of your wine. So I think that it would be better to just leave it at distinctive. That's first, rather than distinctively reflective of, and we start to get into an area between science and metaphysics that we really don't have a roadmap. So that's the first thing. The second thing is going back to what I perhaps, with some exaggeration, talked about as the potential approach of trying to compensate for perceived weaknesses of blaufränkisch versus the approach of, as I like to put it, letting blaufränkisch be blaufränkisch. Again, we need to be cautious here because Dorley is going to be able to tell you about it. If you want to have an example of truly distinctive set of blaufränkisch wines that surely don't seem as though they could be produced anywhere else except in this little section of dwindling Western Carpathian mountains. I think then she would be a prime example. But she'll tell you how much time it takes, how much tasting, and not just tasting in your own cellar, but tasting with people internationally and comparatively tasting. If you really want to try to pull out a style that will also reflect the place in which the grapes are grown, it's a very, very long and hard row. So don't short circuit it just by employing all the buzzwords of terroir. But I do think that there is some truth to the notion that we can look at a grape variety's inherent characteristics, and we can think about what makes that grape variety distinctive, and we can even go so far, perhaps, as to say what aspects of a grape variety's unique characteristics are attractive to us. And if we do that in the case of blaufränkisch, then I think it is fair to have a certain standard of critique or criticism based on how much the wine is capable of displaying the potential diversity of the grapes. So in the case of blaufränkisch, to me, one of the things that seems most remarkable is that you have a grape that inherently is able to pull out scents and flavors that require floral descriptors, lots of stuff that requires mineral descriptors, all of these things that require animal descriptors, something we're familiar with, of course, from red Burgundy as well, plus, of course, lots of fruits and berries, not to forget the fruits and berries. But I think it's fair to say that it's a shame if you have blaufränkisch that doesn't allow for this particular sort of diversity of expression. Then you look at the fact that blaufränkisch, even if you have a firmer skin, smaller berries, and even if you want to push the extraction a bit more, it's not an inherently tannic grape. It's not going to have an imposing sense of tannic structure. So I think it's fair to say, why not make a virtue out of necessity there? Because it allows for a sort of wine which, although it needs élevage in order to really show that multiplicity that I just referred to, can also be quite approachable as a young wine, certainly never hard and tannic. If you're a Bordeaux fan and you're my age, then you probably think, I mean, why are they doing now what they're doing? I mean, they're running away from what makes Cabernet and Merlot great. Those wines are going to have high tannin, and they're going to have structure inherently, and that's what's going to develop the interesting flavors with time. And if you try to eliminate that with long hang time or tricks in the cellar, it's a shame. And finally, of course, that acidity. What was the big problem back in 1862, and you can read other commentators from the decades thereafter and realize, you know, instead of running from the acidity, look at the uniqueness of a grape that has a very modest tannin and that has this potential for a white wine sense of vivacity and refreshment. I mean, if you look at worldwide at the grape varieties that are really distinctive for low tannin black grapes, that is low tannin, high acidity, first of all, I think of our sort of national grape, Zinfandel, which I love to death, and which I like to say, it's, you know, it's like it's a red wine cross-dresser, because the reality is that if it's well done, even when it's 15% alcohol, it's gonna have acid structure almost like a white. Problem though, is that 15% alcohol. Look at Barbera again, almost no tannin, high acidity. I love the grape to death, but again, like the Zinfandel, unlike the blaufränkisch, it has an inherent proclivity to pucker on the vine, and the next thing you know, you have must weights through the roof, and you got 16% alcohol. Of course, in California, you add Jesus units traditionally. I mean, everybody added water to their Zinfandel must, because otherwise it wouldn't even have finished fermenting. But those are unfortunate drawbacks. Blaufränkisch, we don't have that drawback. Of course, you can over-ripen it, but essentially, you have a potential for extraordinarily expressive wines, anywhere from 11.5% of alcohol to 14% of alcohol. That's an amazingly wide spectrum. In the white wine league, I want to think almost that Gruner Veltliner is the only grape that can come along in that regard. So I think it is fair to say, let's look at the unique characteristics of the grape and the virtue, if we think they are indeed virtues, and then try to develop our styles with those sort of guidelines of preserving that diversity and expressing the unique virtues of the grape. So thank you for your patience. If anybody wants to...
Thank you, David.
Anybody wants to ask questions?
Now we know how the right style of the blaufränkisch is. And yeah, a question for David, please. We'll take one because we are a bit...
Yeah.
Actually, it's not a question, but more a comment. Two things. First, quickly about what you were speaking about terroir. It's the exact point. You know, here in Slovenia, the concept of terroir is pretty new, basically. When I came to Slovenia in 2016, it was almost no one speaking about it. And what people are forgetting is there is no terroir without distinctiveness. And that takes time to, as you mentioned, what Dolly is doing in Carnuntum. And that's a very important point that winemakers here in Slovenia has to understand. So I quite like what you were speaking about, the terroir. And the second point, it was something different. I just wanted to thank you, because if this event can happen, it's also thanks to you, because you were the very first early bird jumping the story like a few years ago with Stefan Renat to have this idea of blaufränkisch movement, and we are exchanging a lot by email, and you helped me a lot to go get in touch with people. So if we are here today, it's also thanks to you. So big thanks for that. Thanks, David.
Thanks a lot. So I'm inviting Frau Dorlimur to come to the stage. She fell in love in blaufränkisch. You all know it's not easy, but once you do it, you are there forever. So your stage, please.
Sorry. Okay. When Guillaume invited me to do a presentation here, I was very flattered, because I cannot show you a lot of scientific or technical experiences. And I thought maybe what I can show is kind of how I got introduced to the varietal, and how I got an emotional relationship with it, because I think that this path that I took is maybe a pattern, both for consumers who start at zero, and and on the other side also for wine regions, which discover that they can make red wines, because every wine region that starts like that, everybody does the same mistakes. You talked about Cabernet and Merlot and so on. And so this was also in my past the same thing. And so I think this can give some information how it works. So let's see, which one? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I was born in Carnuntum. That's the little tiny filet in the east of Austria. And actually, I had very little appreciation for the wines of my region, because it was so normal. You know how it is. You grow up in a wine region and you think, it's just a drink. It's a commodity. And I actually was infected with the wine virus during a bicycle tour through France. And it was less for the drink, but it was more an intellectual approach that I had, because I asked myself something that David has already introduced. I asked myself, how is it possible that one can taste in a glass of wine where and on which soil the plant has been growing maybe 5 or 10 years ago, on which the grape was flowering? So how can you taste that? What happens in the grape, in the barrel, in the bottle, so that you can smell and taste where it comes from? That was challenging me. And it's kind of the question of my life, because we still don't know. And so I have to go on studying. And well, then I studied and translated books of like Émile Pinault and so on, because I studied languages, and I wanted to understand what is behind that terroir. So I still didn't find an answer. But then I was so in love with wine that I founded a PR agency. Nice, huh? It's called Wine and Partners. And because I wanted to teach the world what I found great, it's the beauty of the wine and the people of the wine, which are the best people in the world, and the regions of wine, which are the best regions in the world. So I started to work with many wine growers from all around the world, promoting their wines, being very passionate about what they did and what I did. And I learned about styles and regions, about climates and varietals, and more I wanted to make my own wine. So now we come to that what everybody does. Yeah. I said, a great wine, where can it grow? Only either in France or in Italy. So I went to France to search some vineyards that I could buy, but you know the French, they only sell you what they don't want. So there was nothing really great to get. So then I went to Italy, where I had several very good friends who helped me to find a place in the south of Tuscany. So it was kind of a new world place. The hill I bought in the early 90s was just covered with oak trees and sheep. And I thought, that's the second half of my life. I will live in Italy, best country, best culture, best food. And I will make my wine and will make a living of the wine. So I bought some land, did not plant it yet, of course. Then I went home, did some calculation, and in year 15 of my calculations, there was still no profit. I said, something's going wrong here. Nowadays, I know that it was right. So I did not plant yet. I said, I have to go on with my calculations. So I just owned the land. But then destiny had a different plan for me. And I moved to Portugal, you maybe know the story, and I lived in the Douro, which was a short but very important experience in my life. I added 2 new elements in my wine knowledge. 2 elements that before, like in the Austrian community, I would not really have realized. One was, there is nothing better than old wines. But this was really new, because in Austria there was no vineyard older than 30 years. Old wines. And the second thing, which also was not very common in Austria, was there is nothing more attractive in wine than freshness. Because here, in that region where you have 40 to 50 grades in summer and very little rainfall, and so it is not a talent to get mature grapes. It's a talent to have like a port with freshness, with acidity. Okay, old wines and freshness. So this new knowledge told me that my South Tuscan history is already over, because if I start planting wines in the age of like 38, I will never see how it is when they become old. So I had to reinvent my own life, and I said, where can I go? Where can I make wine? Where I get like old vineyards and where I can get freshness. And imagine what happened. I came back to the place where I was born, in Könontom. So the Spitzerberg is the easternmost hillside of Austria and the westernmost part of the Carpathians. My grandmother, who used to live there the first 18 years of her life, she got at her wedding, she got a present of 0.17 hectares of a vineyard there, and my family kept on working it. It was a very melancholic place for me. It has been digged out though in the 70s, so it was just a relict. But I had a very good emotional feeling about that place. So with my then future and now ex-husband, I started to make some wine there in 2002, and it was terrible. But I got this another vineyard that I rented then, and later on I replanted also that one of my grandmother. And I got a vineyard with blaufränkisch vines that were planted in 1965. It's about my age, so very young. And I thought it was good. I liked it. So 2003, we were already starting earlier, doing the right things. But actually, we were not sure whether Blaufränkisch really was the best varietal that we could produce on the Spitzberg. What did we do? We did what everybody does who starts making red wine. We planted some Merlot, we planted some Cabernet Franc, some Petit Verdot, some Tempranillo, some Malbec, some Syrah. I think that's all. And wanted to find out what happens. And maybe there is something that is even much more better than Blaufränkisch and we just didn't know it, or the people just didn't know it. But why did we plant those varietals? Look, I'm not sure whether you can see that from behind. This is the temperatures. The green one, the green line is Tuscany, the blue line is Bordeaux, and the pink line is Carnuntum. So you see, we're getting quite hot in summer, but we are quite cold in winter. And maybe the most important thing is that like from mid of August, we are getting really cold nights. So this is why the average temperature goes down rapidly. And now something. So this is, it shows actually that from the varietals, we could really go to the same places as where I wanted to buy vineyards in Tuscany and Bordeaux. But now, this is the rainfall. So this shows we are in continental climate. It's very different from regions that are close to the sea. We have the most rainfall normally now, but we're still waiting this year. We have only between 280 in very dry years and 400 millimeters of rainfall in the Spitzberg. A year, not in January, in a year. And this rainfall usually is concentrated between like mid of May and beginning of July. Then we have big, big rainfalls, far too much in one day that the soil could keep, and very often with thunderstorms. Happily, we don't have hails, but I think it just happened in Burgenland again, in the South Burgenland. So we usually don't have hail, but we have very heavy rainfalls that in the old time would make a lot of erosion as well and have changed the terroir a lot. But from beginning of July till the end of the year, it's getting drier and drier and drier and drier. And that compared with the cold nights from August on makes it really a good place for late ripening grapes, if you want some freshness, remember. And yeah, you can wait because even if we have a big rain, usually it gets drier later on. I'm not sure whether you know about the Hagelin index or whether you call it Huglin. You know, yes? So we are at about 2,000 and getting higher and higher. So it's really something that is perfect for Cabernet or Syrah in our temperatures, yeah? So this is why I think what we did, our plantings was quite correct, and the grapes mature very nicely. We see beautiful results, for example, with Syrah in the last years. But with all the fantastic grapes that we have planted and all the nice results that we have, we definitely saw that Blaufränkisch always gave the best results, because you know what I was looking for is a wine that reflects where it has been growing, and Blaufränkisch does it much better than all the other varietals that we have. Maybe you can't see very well that picture, but I have some maps with me. If you are interested later on, I can show you. So this is again Carnuntum, and how can I make light? The pointer is there? Is there any pointer? No. Anyhow, you can see it. So, is it now here? Oh, there is a mouse. But it's not me. It's another mouse. Anyhow, this is the region of Carnuntum, and the interesting thing is that, I think we can see it on a later map as well. Here we have two mountain chains that start or end in Carnuntum. On the eastern-western part of Carnuntum, it's where the Alps start, so the Leiterberg hillside. And in the northeastern part of Carnuntum, it's where the Carpathian starts. So it is really two mountain chains, I would say, that start in Carnuntum. It's not where they end, but where they start. And those two, and there is a corridor of about 30 kilometers between those two. And this corridor is a perfect tunnel for wind. This is the wind in Carnuntum, actually in this corridor. To the left is the Alps, to the right is the Carpathians, and in the middle you always have wind. I can't do barbecue, otherwise the village would not exist anymore. Everything would burn down. It's very dry and very windy. So we usually have either wind coming from east, southeast, most of the time. Those wind comes up, goes then into the Danube Valley and prevents the rains from the Atlantic to come down to us. This is why it's so dry. And sometimes we also have wind from north-southwest, and this usually brings rain, but only a little bit. So many things going on. Okay, this is a little bit better, showing how Carnuntum looks like. So in the very, you see the Danube, that's the blue thing, and Vienna is the western border of Carnuntum, and Bratislava is kind of the eastern border, and the Carnuntum is the region south of the Danube and north of the Leiter, which is the border to Burgenland, even though everybody puts Carnuntum into Burgenland via Lower Austria. So you see again the Alps, Leiterberg, starting in the southwest, and also building a border to the Lake Neusel, which is on the bottom of the picture. So we don't have any influence of Lake Neusel. I would say that most of the regions in Burgenland, at least in the north, have influence from the lake. That means it is moderating a little bit the temperature, and I think more importantly even, it always has some humidity in the air. So this is why I think the wines in Burgenland, in blaufränkisch in Burgenland, always have a little bit more humidity available to mature in a more regular way, or to produce maybe a little bit more sugar by photosynthesis. On the Spitzerberg, which is the beautiful tiny fillet that you can see in the red circle, we don't have humidity in the air because we have this wind coming all the time. So you can imagine that in the very old times, like more than 20 million years ago, Alps and Carpathians were one mountain chain. The link broke down 20 million years ago, they say, I don't know. And everything was filled with sea, of course. So the Spitzerberg was kind of the beach, you know, this is why we have sandy limestone there nowadays, like at the beach. And later on, when also the sea went away, we had the Danube flowing through that corridor. Nowadays it goes from west to east, but then it went from north to south through that corridor. And it brought and left a big amount of gravel. So in the lower parts of this corridor, you find a lot of gravel. And then on the Spitzerberg and on higher, on the eastern part, you find limestone. While the more western part of Carnuntum, it used to be at that time a region of tiny lakes, so that are slowly, over the millions of years, kind of dried out, and what we have there is a lot of sediment soil. So Carnuntum is a tiny region. We only have like 900 hectares of vineyards, but we have a big diversity of soils. So in the western part, where you have more the sediment soils, the soils can keep humidity, a little bit of what we have in terms of rain. So there you find different varietals, while in the eastern part, with that limestone that does not keep any rain, you can only plant varietals that can really go with very dry conditions. So this is maybe one of the reasons why in the western part of Carnuntum you find much more Zweigelt, but you also find Merlot, you find Grüner Veltliner and so on. And in the eastern part of Carnuntum you find blaufränkisch and blaufränkisch and blaufränkisch and blaufränkisch. So this is, currently this has been taken, that was the situation in Carnuntum in 2018. End of 18. So you see about 55% of our production is red wine, and more than a quarter of everything is Zweigelt. So Zweigelt is very famous for Carnuntum, or Carnuntum is very famous for Zweigelt, and blaufränkisch is only 11%. And so when I started making wine there, and I was so in love with blaufränkisch, everybody was like, okay. So when we did a big tasting of Carnuntum wines, and I had my big neighbors like Markovic and Netzel and Glatzer, and they had fantastic Zweigelt wines, and then the consumers came to my table, they said like, oh, what happened with your wine? I said, it's really, I want it like that. Ah, okay, thank you. And I went on. So it was, yeah, it is what happens everywhere, so this is why we have to fight for blaufränkisch. Yeah. So, we knew, I understood that blaufränkisch is the best what we can have on the Spitzerberg. So now how can we vinify it? What can we do with those wonderful grapes to bring the best expression of Spitzerberg? And something that David has mentioned before already, I think it is really important to work together and to discuss and to exchange and to regroup producers all the time and to work together. I strongly believe in associations, in cooperation, in exchange, and in growing together. And I do not believe at all in the thinking of, I do everything better than the others are really stupid, I go my own way because they are too bad to go with me. This is not the way, and we really have to engage ourselves if we have passion for something, to bring others into that boat as well and to do the work together. So when I started working on Spitzerberg and I realized that this is so a special place and so distinctive and so fantastic, I said, we have to do that together because it's a work of appellation. It's not a work of a brand. It's really a work of appellation. So I did a meeting with all the owners of vineyards in Prellenkirchen. So it was like 60 men older than 75 and me. And I tried to explain them what an appellation is and that we have to protect the appellation, that we have to put Spitzerberg on the label because nobody did. And that we have to find our style, how to express that wonderful. And they didn't understand me until I said, look, if you really work together and you try to protect your appellation, then you can earn more money with it. And they said, oh, really? How comes? And I said, yeah, look, for example, how they do it in Burgundy, or look how they do it in Champagne. They don't get 30 cents for a kilo of grapes, but they get 30 euros for a kilo of grapes. And they said, now you are talking. So we tried to find a way how grape producers could earn more money and what they should do and what they should look on, because until then they just sold their grapes for very little money and they tried to have a maximum yield to get a little bit more money, and it was all a nightmare. The vineyards were looking terrible. But what I also did, I created a group of producers that were seriously working, and they had some vision where we could go, and we sat down together several times per year, and we did blind tastings of our wine and of our wines, and we tried to find out what have you been doing, what is better, what do you think, what makes the wines more distinctive from other places. And what we also did, I hope you don't sleep, I'll be finished soon, we invited the most famous Blaufränkisch growers from other regions, so from South Burgenland with Uwe of Schiefer and Christoph Wachter, and of course Roland Welig and the Treebaumers and Heinrich and everybody. We sat down together, we did blind tastings, and we said, what do you think, what is the niche for Spitzerberg to be very different from all the other places? Because what we have seen is that Blaufränkisch really reflects its soils and the place where it comes from. So we have to stick to that and we don't want to copy anybody. So we are already at the place that we don't want to copy Bordeaux, but now we don't want to copy Mittelburgenland, or we don't want to copy Rust, or we don't want to copy Eisenberg. So we worked together and we tried to find out what is the best way to do. So we experimented different things. We experimented like destemming or not, hand destemming, machine destemming, different macerations, different fermentations. We did foot stomping, as you can see, and what we do now is really we do hand pushing. We don't use any machines, any pumps. We make sure that everything is very, very soft. And what we have discovered is, now you wonder, that Blaufränkisch expresses itself the best, the less we interfere. So the less we do, the more exciting is the wine. I think Blaufränkisch does not like to be forced into a direction. It is a free spirit. So in my opinion, Blaufränkisch is an Aquarius, if we talk about zodiac signs. If it must accept frames, it falls into depression and loses its talents. Blaufränkisch, like all Aquarians, and I know what I'm talking about, believe in liberty and in individuality. So, this is the Spitzerberg. As I said, I have better maps than there. And in the beginning, as I was so excited by old wines, what I did really is selecting my grapes by the age of vines. In the beginning, it was easy because I had only one vineyard, but then it was growing and growing. Now the whole Spitzerberg has about 90 hectares of vineyards, of which I work on 12 hectares, of which 11 hectares are Blaufränkisch, and those are divided into 36 vineyard plots. So I really have a nice choice of what I can do, and as I said in the beginning, I just selected them by the age. The youngest wines go into the regional wine, the middle-aged wines go into the village wine, and the oldest vineyards go into the single vineyard wine called Riedspitzerberg. And one day we had this new requirement by the administration, by law, that we have to define what are the limits of each vineyard in Austria. It's called the famous Riedenabgrenzung. So we all sat together, we already knew who the people who are serious on Spitzerberg, and we said, okay, now let's define what is Spitzerberg. And then I got a call from the administration that said, actually, Spitzerberg does not exist in the list of vineyards. It's a geographical appellation, but it's not a wine appellation. Oh, interesting, but what is then the names of the appellation? And they gave us like 12 or 14 different vineyard designations. So Spitzerberg did not exist. And we looked at that list and said, what's that? I've never seen that. And nobody uses it. We don't use it. We just delete that and we call everything Riedspitzerberg. And so I felt a little bit bad about it, but still, really, I have never heard about these names before. So I went back to my cellar. And you see I have a concrete soil, and there I took the samples from the different vineyards that we had, and it was for the first time in my life that I really regrouped the wines after the names of the sub-vineyards, not by age. And this was mind-blowing, because it was really so different, and it's really just 100 meters one from the other, but it was a completely different expression. Whether they were old or young wines, there was a common expression of those sub-vineyards. So I just called my colleagues and said, stop, 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 don't send the new map to the authorities. We have to rethink everything. So then everybody came with their samples, are divided by sub-vineyards. And it was really a big aha, because nobody has been thinking about that before. Also because most of the growers only had like 1 or 2 vineyards, so there was not really a possibility to compare. But this was so mind-blowing, and it was a great moment. So since then, I was fighting for the permission to label my wines both with the name Rittspitzerberg and the sub-vineyard. But the authorities said no. That's too confusing. 2 appellations on 1 label. Okay, look, we have Austria on it, we have Carnuntum on it, we have Prellenkirchen on it, which is the village, and I have 1 vineyard. Maybe I can put the second name as well? No. Okay, so we kept on fighting, we invited all the important people, we drank and tasted, and it didn't really work. Until they found out that at the moment where we had to send in the appellation names, we had already put both and said, yeah, it's already in the law, you can use it. So now we can do it. And it is actually in 2019, so the current vintage that I'm doing a launch now, that we have both on the label. Just want to show you, for example, this is Obere Roterd, above the street, and this is one of my favorite places, maybe because it was one of the vineyards of my grandmother, but it's so different from, for example, this one. Okay, it's also a different season, this is autumn, but this is like, it's called Obere Spitzer, and it's the most western part, to meet the finest of everything. And I went through those vineyards together with our friend Maria Heinrich, the world-famous geologist, and I said, explain me please, why is it different? And she did her tests, and she said, from mineral side, it's all the same. It's all limestone, degenerated dolomite, it's all the same. But you know what is the difference? She said, I think it's the size of the grain. Because in the eastern part of Spitzerberg, there has been more degeneration already, and the grain is a little bit tinier, so the soil can keep a little bit more of humidity. And the more you go west, it is larger, and so the water just goes through, and the soil does not keep humidity. So this kind of confirmed to me a little bit that, let's say, terroir, in my personal experience, is of course has to do with the soil, but in my opinion it has mostly to do with the fact when and how much water is available for the wine, because then it has a different cycle of its life in that moment, and it has to fight maybe a little bit more or a little bit less, and this makes the difference in my opinion, but of course I have no idea of anything. So now you see, no, I have to show you here. So this is Rittspitzerberg, Obere Spitzer, Kobeln, and Obere Roterd. I have here and here and here, yeah, and Kranzen. So now we have 4 labels, and it's really, you see, we really want to make the life a little bit more complicated. We have 4 wines that at the first moment look identical, but they have a tiny notion of the parcel on the bottom. And maybe it's really confusing, but I love it. So now I have to see on which I have to go on here. Yeah, this is just to end, because I'm very proud of this. I have shown you that distribution of grapes in Carnuntum from 2018, where we had 28% of Zweigelt and 11% of blaufränkisch. And I've just done a survey with the Carnuntum producers in the last 3 days and said, write me immediately, have you planted any new vineyards in the last 3 years? And if yes, which varietals and what is the surface? And you see, blaufränkisch, everybody has been laughing on what is that, what are you doing here? You see, blaufränkisch has been planted, nearly 1/3 of all the vineyards have been planted with blaufränkisch, and Zweigelt is still there, and the white wines are still there, and some other as well, but blaufränkisch is the winner, and I think for a reason. Thank you for your attention. If you want to know more, or if you want to get in contact with my passion, my big love, please come and visit me. I'm very happy to show you all my vineyards, because I'm so proud that eventually we found together Blaufränkisch and me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolly, for this beautiful love story. Sometimes people need to go around the world to find the treasure at home, but it's hard to dig it sometimes, yeah. Okay, maybe there is a question for Dolly at the moment. Yes, please. And you can share the mic.
Yeah, so, you know, there's a saying about if you have a carpenter has a hammer, everything he sees is a nail. So Maria Heinrich, of course, a wonderful wine expert, for sure, but she's a geologist, so she sees everything as rocks. So, I mean, her comments about granularity of soil fit the typical account of geologists. It's all about the water management. It's sort of hard for those of us who are used to tasting the differences in character for whether it's Blaufränkisch or Pinot Noir or Riesling. It's kind of hard for us to wrap our heads around that. I would think, not being a scientist, that the missing link is, and perhaps more important, is the microbial life and the fungal life and the, you know, what is promoted in the soil. So have you done any research or work to try to determine the differences from one site to another? Because that would seem to me the more obvious means of mediating flavor rather than just the water management per se.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you are right. No, we have not done any scientific things, because, as you know, I'm struggled between all the things that I do, and it's. But we have converted all the vineyards to organic since 2015, and I think we made big progress in even more distinctiveness of the sub-vineyards. I would say this is exactly what you are asking. Yeah, I can't prove it, I just can taste it.
Okay, thank you, David and Molly, for this, Dolly, for this. We'll take a break. We are a bit behind the schedule, so we have 15 minutes plus the overtimes. So 10:30 and overtimes, and we are back. Coffee break, please. Yeah.